Alright, so we are back in our AWS IAM console for another video, and the first thing that we need to clarify is that it looks a little bit different. So when I logged to our AWS account on the next day, it turned out that AWS in the meantime changed some styling. So you can see that there is a little bit of a difference, and if we navigate to the main console, it also looks stylistically a little bit different, but that's just the styling. So once that is out of the way, let's continue to learn IAM. And the next important thing that we will learn about today is roles. So concept of roles, we can think about it more or less as the users. But the difference is that when we are creating a user, we are creating this user to either logged in through management console or use secret access key to use programmatically, maybe through CLI. Roles are also a thing that we attach permissions to them, but roles are being assumed. And we are mostly using them in two places. Once to give AWS services access to other AWS services. So let's say we will create a Lambda function, which we will talk later in the course, or we would spin up an EC2 instance. Then actually we can allow for this Lambda function to assume particular role, and then using this role have some specific permissions, let's say to S3 bucket, which we will try to do right now. But there is also one more common usage that we can have, let's say, this AWS account with our particular user briefly.user or briefly.test, but we will also have another AWS account with a specific role and then set something called trusted entity, which we'll talk a bit in a moment regarding services, and allow for the user in AWS account 1 to assume role in a different AWS account, let's call it for the sake of argument 2, and then logged in AWS 1, do some things, let's say view buckets in Amazon account 2nd. So let's go to creating a role for our service. So we will go to roles, we are already here. Let's create a role and we will take AWS service, or let's say here AWS account. It's something that I mentioned. Allow entities in other AWS accounts belonging to you or a third party to perform actions in your account. Third party would be, let's say, for audit purposes. Maybe you need to let into your AWS account structure some third party external auditor. So you are creating a role with access, maybe read only to the whole account or to particular services, and then set this trusted entity. But let's get back to the service and our use case. We will choose commonly used service EC2 or Lambda or other services. So let's choose Lambda right now. I will click next. This view we already know from the user. So permissions, policies, and attachments. So let's navigate to the S3 and let's do this Amazon S3 read-only access 1. We'll click next. Here we can call our role, so maybe briefly.role. And description, we have it by default, allows Lambda functions to call AWS services on your behalf. And we have our selected trusted entities. You can see that it looks more or less like the permissions policies that we talked about. It's also in the JSON format. It also has version and statement, and inside statement, effect, action, and principle. So as mentioned in the description, what we are doing here, we are allowing for what? We are allowing action STS assume role. STS is a secure token service from AWS. It allows to generate the temporary credentials which are needed for the role, and the principle what can actually do this action. So service Lambda, Amazon AWS.com can do STS assume role. And that's why Lambda can assume this particular role and have these permissions for our S3 read-only access. So let's create this role. And once we create it, we will have it here. The same as users, we have our role, and we can navigate here, see the permissions, add or remove them, and we can also edit our trust relationships. So let's say maybe add another service here to assume the same role, and also one more quite useful tab, last accessed. So if this role would be used, we would be able to see here when it was last used and by what service. So that will be all regarding the roles, and see ya in another video in just a moment.